Once that weight lifts, plenty of men experience an unexpected sense of renewal. They wake up with real motivation again. They take longer walks, stick to workout routines, finally travel to the places they always dreamed of seeing, or pick back up hobbies they abandoned when life got too hectic. Some rebuild old friendships. Others stumble into entirely new passions that hand them a fresh sense of purpose. What's remarkable is that none of this happens because another person swooped in and changed part of their life. It happens because they finally have the physical and emotional bandwidth to invest in themselves again. That renewed energy doesn't just make daily life more enjoyable. It reminds a man that aging doesn't have to mean shrinking. In many ways, this chapter becomes a chance to feel more alive than he has in decades, simply because his energy finally flows toward his own life instead of being pulled in a dozen directions at once. As a man reclaims his energy, he also starts recovering something many people don't even realize can be lost: his dignity. This isn't dignity rooted in wealth, status, or public recognition. It's the quiet self-assurance that comes from living according to his own values instead of constantly chasing someone else's approval. Over a lifetime, many men grow accustomed to seeking validation without even noticing it. They over-explain themselves, work overtime to dodge criticism, and spend years trying to keep everyone around them content. Slowly, they begin measuring their own worth by how useful they are to others. The problem with that mindset is simple. Your sense of value ends up in someone else's hands. Single senior men frequently describe an entirely different way of living. They rise each morning without the need to justify their choices, defend their decisions, or ask permission to enjoy their own existence. They spend their time around people who genuinely value them, and they quietly drift away from those who bring unnecessary conflict or negativity into their lives. Over time, this reshapes their entire self-image. Instead of constantly asking whether they're meeting someone else's standards, they start asking whether they're living up to their own. That single shift is enormously powerful because it restores control to where it always belonged. A man who respects himself no longer feels obligated to endure situations that steal his peace. He becomes far more selective about where his time, attention, and emotional energy go. Perhaps that's one of the greatest gifts that comes with age. Realizing dignity was never something someone else could hand you. It's something you protect, one choice at a time. Picture this. You open your eyes one morning and understand that the deepest sense of freedom you've ever felt didn't come from a fatter paycheck, a bigger title, or the ideal partner. It came from something far more basic. It came from finally answering to yourself. For countless older men, this awareness surfaces much later in life, frequently after years spent satisfying others' expectations, shouldering responsibilities, and placing everyone else's wants above their own. By the time they arrive at this understanding, they often wish they'd grasped it decades sooner. For generations, society has judged a man's worth by how many people rely on him. First comes the pressure to build a career. Then comes the pressure to support a household, resolve issues, make sacrifices, and silently shoulder burdens without a word of complaint. Somewhere in that process, countless men lose sight of a basic question. What kind of life do I actually want for myself? Something extraordinary tends to unfold once a man crosses 60. Many stop craving validation and start pursuing serenity instead. They come to understand that living alone isn't inherently a marker of isolation, defeat, or being unwanted. For plenty of them, it's actually the first genuine chance in decades to shape their life around their own principles rather than everyone else's demands. Today we'll diving into why so many single men in their senior years describe this period as the calmest, most self-assured, and most rewarding phase they've ever lived through. Once you grasp the psychology driving this shift, your perspective on independence and aging may never be quite the same. For the bulk of a man's life, background noise becomes so constant, he stops even registering it. Obligations greet him the second he wakes. Choices that ripple outward to others. Expectations he feels bound to fulfill. Problems that somehow land squarely on his shoulders. Bit by bit, this relentless pressure fuses into his sense of self. And because the shift happens so slowly, most men never grasp how much of themselves has quietly slipped away beneath it all. Then, without warning, things start to shift. Duties evolve. Kids grow into adults. Careers wind down or wrap up entirely. The constant pull to prove himself begins to fade. And for the first time in years, many men encounter something almost foreign. Quiet. That quiet can feel strange at first. Some even confuse it with loneliness. Having spent a lifetime assuming solitude automatically signals something's wrong. But eventually, many realize that quiet isn't hollow at all. It's calming. Freed from a constant stream of emotional demands pulling at his attention, a man starts to hear his own mind more distinctly. He begins wondering things he never had room to consider before. What actually brings me joy? Whose company do I genuinely enjoy? What am I done putting up with? Those answers don't surface instantly, but they grow clearer once life stops being crowded with noise. That clarity reshapes everything. A man who truly knows himself no longer feels compelled to chase validation or bend to someone else's blueprint. Instead, he starts making choices that guard his peace. And for countless senior men, that becomes one of the most powerful freedoms they've ever tasted. This is the truth nobody tells you soon enough. Freedom was never about who stood beside you. It was always about who you became when no one was watching. The years after 60 aren't a countdown. They're a comeback. Where every sunrise you wake up to, on your own terms, is proof that you survived decades of carrying weight that was never fully yours to carry, and you made it to the other side, whole. Stop waiting for permission to enjoy the life you've already earned. Stop measuring your worth by who needs you, and start measuring it by who you've become. This is your reclamation. Walk the quiet mornings. Take the trip. Call the old friend. Sit in the silence and let it hold you instead of scaring you. Because peace was never something you had to find out there. It was buried under years of noise, waiting patiently for you to come home to it. This isn't the end of your story. This is the first chapter you've ever written entirely for yourself. Live it loudly. Live it free. Live it as the man you were always meant to become.